Krythak's six-fingered hands shook slightly as he read the message for the third time. The bioluminescent patches along his elongated skull pulsed a nervous blue-green, betraying his emotions, despite his attempt to remain professional. 23 years as a war correspondent for the Galactic Broadcasting Consortium, and this assignment felt different somehow. Species, human, origin, Solth. 3. Conflict status, active engagement with Kalash Empire forces. Estimated time to complete subjugation, 2 to 3 standard cycles. He leaned back in his chair aboard the transport vessel Truthseeker, watching the stars streak past through the reinforced viewport. The ship's AI chimed softly, indicating they were approaching the dropout point at the edge of what the humans called their territory. Territory is such an amusing concept for a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel. 18 months ago, Krythax had seen this story play out 17 times before. Young species, full of hope and primitive determination, stumbling into conflicts with established galactic powers. The Kalash Empire had been expanding for over 4,000 years, perfecting their military doctrine against hundreds of different species. They were efficient, methodical, and utterly without mercy. The Zorani had lasted 6 weeks. The Vorthok managed 3 months, mainly because they could hibernate in their mountain fortresses. The Kellen had surprised everyone by holding out for nearly a full cycle, but even they eventually fell to the Kalash bioweapons. Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, announced the ship's AI in its melodious synthetic voice. Krythax activated his recording equipment, checking each device with practiced efficiency. His neural interface hummed to life, connecting him to the ship's sensor arrays. He would document humanity's final weeks, add their story to the galactic archives, and move on to the next assignment. Perhaps the consortium would send him to cover the hegemony's expansion into the outer rim. It might actually be interesting. The stars stopped streaking and returned to their familiar points of light. Immediately, every alarm on the ship began screaming. What in the name of the eternal void? Krythax's curse died in his throat as he stared at the sensor readings. His bioluminescent patches flared bright yellow in shock, where he expected to find debris fields and the scattered remnants of a dying civilization. Space around the Sol system buzzed with activity. Defensive platforms hung in perfect formation, their weapons arrays powered and tracking. Patrol ships moved in coordinated patterns that spoke of military discipline and tactical awareness. Beyond them, impossibly, he detected what could only be described as offensive formations. Ships arranged not for desperate defense but for attack. This cannot be accurate, he whispered, switching to backup sensors. The readings remained the same. The preliminary intelligence reports had been clear. Humans had been at war with the Kalash for exactly 8 standard months. Most species needed at least a year just to understand the basics of interstellar combat, let alone implement effective strategies. The Kalash typically allowed their prey this time to organize, finding the hunt more enjoyable when their victims could offer token resistance. But this looked like a civilization that had been preparing for war for decades. A proximity alarm chimed, and Krythax's heart skipped a beat as his sensors detected an approaching vessel. It materialized from what appeared to be empty space, its whole configuration unlike anything in the galactic databases. The ship was clearly of human design, but it incorporated elements that seemed almost familiar. Were those Kalash weapon mounts? And that hull plating looked suspiciously similar to Vorthok defensive systems. The human ship was scarred and patched, showing signs of recent combat. Blast marks scored its hull, and sections had been repaired with what looked like salvaged materials. Yet it moved with the confidence of a predator, not the desperation of prey. "Unknown vessel, this is HDC Indomitable," came a voice over the communications array. The speaker used Galactic Standard, but with an accent Krythax had never heard before. "State your business in human space." "This is Senior Correspondent Krythax of the Galactic Broadcasting Consortium," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I am here to document the current conflict under the Neutral Observer Protocols." A pause. "Stand by for boarding. Do not attempt to change course or activate any weapon systems." Krythax's transport was a civilian vessel, equipped with nothing more dangerous than a mining laser for clearing space debris. The fact that the humans felt the need to warn him suggested a level of paranoia that bordered on the pathological. The docking process was smooth and professional. As the airlock cycled, Krythax adjusted his translator implant and checked his recording devices one final time. He had interviewed generals, warlords, and species leaders throughout the galaxy. This would be no different. The airlock opened, and Krythax stepped forward to meet what he assumed would be a desperate, frightened commander of a doomed species. Instead, he found himself face to face with a being that made his primitive brainstem scream warnings he couldn't quite understand. Commander Hansel Kim stood barely 2 meters tall, significantly smaller than Krythax's own species, the humans. Skin was pale, marked with scars that spoke of recent combat, and his uniform was practical rather than ceremonial. But it was his eyes that made Krythax's survival instincts activate. They were calm, calculating, and held a depth of experience that seemed impossible for someone from such a young species. "Welcome to the front lines," Hansel said, his words precise despite the unfamiliar accent. "I hope you're ready for the real story?" Those words carried weight that Krythax couldn't yet comprehend, but something in the human's tone suggested that everything he thought he knew about this conflict was about to change. The morning of his third day with Human Defense Force Unit 77 Alpha, Krythax woke to the sound of humans maintaining their weapons. The repetitive clicking and worry had become as familiar as his own heartbeat over the past 72 hours. What hadn't become familiar was the complete absence of fear he observed in these creatures. Lieutenant Borum Park crouched behind a makeshift barrier constructed from salvaged Kalish hull plating, her rifle across her knees as she methodically checked each component. Krythax counted this was the 5th time in the past hour she had performed the same inspection. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, but her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. "Contact in 15 minutes, she announced without looking up from her weapon. "Kalish dropships incoming from the northwest. Looks like they're bringing friends this time." Krythax activated his recording equipment and peered through his portable scanner. The readout made his bioluminescent patches flicker with anxiety. 37 Kalish attack craft, carrying what appeared to be nearly 400 warriors, against the 23 humans in this position, in every conflict he had documented. This would mark the moment when the defending force either retreated or prepared for glorious but futile last stands. The mathematics were simple. Even if each human managed to eliminate 10 Kalish warriors, which was optimistic given the enemy's superior equipment and centuries of combat experience, the position would still be overrun. "Shouldn't we be falling back to a more defensible position?" Krythax asked, trying to keep the concern out of his voice. Borum looked at him with an expression he was learning to recognize, the patient look humans gave when they were about to explain something they considered obvious. "Fall back to where?" "This is our world. Our home." Sides, she gestured toward the approaching enemy formation. "They're exactly where we want them." That was when the singing started. It began with Private Tae-Young Lee, whose left arm hung at an unnatural angle from yesterday's skirmish. Despite what was clearly a broken bone, he had refused evacuation, insisting he could still operate his heavy plasma cannon. His voice rose in a melody that Krythax's translator struggled to process, not because of language barriers, because the emotional content seemed to overload the device's capacity. Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that vibrated. Through the ground beneath Krythax's feet, this wasn't the death song of the Kellen, who sang to honor their ancestors before battle. It wasn't the war chant of the Zorani, designed to intimidate enemies. This was something else entirely, a sound that seemed to synchronize not just their voices, but their movements, their breathing, even their heartbeats. "What are they singing?" Krythax whispered to Corporal Minho Jong, who was adjusting the settings on what appeared to be a modified Kalish shield generator. "Old song from our world," Minho replied, his fingers dancing over controls that should have been incomprehensible to his species. "About a mountain that wouldn't fall, no matter how hard the wind blew." He smiled, and Krythax noticed that all humans seemed to have the same predatory dental structure. The Kalish were about to learn why that mountain was special. The first dropships screamed through the atmosphere, their engines leaving trails of superheated plasma. Standard Kalish. Doctrine called for overwhelming force applied at the point of least resistance. They would land, establish a perimeter, and advance in their trademark pincer formation that had crushed resistance on 100 worlds. "Stay low and keep recording," Bioram ordered, her voice carrying easily over the approaching roar of enemy engines. "The galaxy needs to see this." The Kalash landed with practiced precision, their black armor gleaming as they poured from their transports. Krythax had seen Kalash warriors in action before, 3-meter-tall bipeds with natural armor, plating, and forearms, each capable of independent weapon operation. They moved like a single organism, their centuries of military evolution creating formations that few species could even comprehend, let alone counter. But as the first wave of Kalash warriors advanced toward the human position, something impossible happened. Humans didn't just hold their ground, they attacked. Taeyong's plasma cannon roared to life, its modified energy matrix cutting through Kalash shields like they were tissue paper. But instead of the standard suppressive fire pattern taught in every military academy, he was targeting specific points in the enemy formation: communications officers, squad leaders, the specialized engineers who operated their heavy equipment. How? Does he know which ones to target? Out! Krythax shouted over the weapons fire. "Pattern recognition," Sergeant Duhayan Nam replied, simultaneously operating 2 captured Kalash rifles with a fluidity that their original designers had never achieved. Humans are good at finding patterns, also good at breaking them. It's the battle. That followed rewrote everything Krythax thought he understood about military science. When the Kalash attempted to flank left, they found the humans had already repositioned to counter the movement. When they tried their signature vertical assault using jump packs, human-modified gravity mines pulled them from the sky. Every tactical doctrine the Kalash employed seemed to have been anticipated, studied, and countered. But it was the human response to casualties that truly shocked the war correspondent. When Private Sujanot took a direct hit from a Kalash particle beam, instead of falling back or calling for medical assistance, she immediately analyzed the weapon that had wounded her, shouted targeting information to her squad mates, and continued. Fighting with what appeared to be a punctured lung, Duhayan's rifle took a direct hit and exploded in his hands, leaving him temporarily weaponless in the middle of a firefight. Without hesitation, he dove toward a fallen Kalash warrior, stripped the alien's energy rifle, and began using it with greater accuracy than its original owner had demonstrated. Within minutes, he was teaching other humans how to adjust the weapon settings for maximum effectiveness against Kalash armor. "Impossible," Krythax muttered, watching humans learn alien technology in real time while under fire. "They've never seen these weapons before?" "Sure we have," Minho called back, ducking as a plasma bolt seared the air above his head. "Been fighting Kalash for months now. You pick things up." It's the enemy's pincer movement which had destroyed the Vorthok resistance. In their final battle, was not just anticipated, but turned into a trap. As Kalash forces moved to encircle the human position, they found themselves walking into overlapping fields of fire from weapons. Didn't even recognize hybrid devices that combined human engineering with captured alien technology. By the time the smoke cleared, the numerical advantage that should have guaranteed Kalash victory had become irrelevant. Over 200 Kalash warriors lay scattered across the battlefield, while the humans had suffered only minor casualties. The remaining enemy forces were retreating to their dropships, their formation broken and their morale shattered. Krythax watched Taeyong fashion a splint from a piece of Kalash armor plating, using the enemy's own advanced materials to treat his injury. The young human then calmly returned to his weapon emplacement as if nothing had happened. "Don't you need proper medical attention?" Krythax asked, his voice barely steady. Taeyong looked at his makeshift splint, flexed his fingers to test. The mobility then grinned with those predator teeth that all humans seem to possess. This is nothing. You should see what we do when we're actually hurt." The casual dismissal of what would have been a career-ending injury for most species sent chills through Krythax's nervous system. As he watched the humans begin salvaging equipment from the battlefield, already discussing improvements and modifications, he realized he wasn't documenting a desperate last stand. He was witnessing the emergence of something the galaxy had never seen before. a species that treated warfare not as destruction, but as education. The massive blast doors of what had once been Kalash Manufacturing Complex Theta 7 slid open, with a pneumatic hiss that made Krythax's hearing organs flutter nervously. Captain Unesio Choi stepped through first, her boots echoing against metal flooring that still bore the distinctive hexagonal patterns of Kalash architecture. But everything else about the facility had changed. Where Krythax expected to see the pristine, sterile production lines typical of Kalash engineering, he found something that looked like controlled chaos. Humans swarmed over machinery that had been completely reconfigured, their modifications so extensive that the original purpose of the equipment was barely recognizable. Sparks flew from welding torches, the air hummed with the sound of plasma. Cutters and holographic displays showed weapon designs that made his translator and plant struggle to find appropriate terms. "Welcome to what we call the Innovation Center," Unesio said, her voice carrying a pride that Krythax was beginning to recognize as distinctly human. 3 weeks ago, this place was churning out the same energy rifles the Kalash had been using for the past 2 millennia. Today, well, she gestured toward a production line where sleek, deadly-looking weapons rolled off conveyor belts at a rate that seemed physically impossible. "Adaptive plasma accelerators," she explained casually, picking up one of the weapons to demonstrate its weight and balance. "We took apart their standard infantry weapons, figured out what made them tick, improved the efficiency by 30%, and scaled up production. Should be enough to outfit the entire Third Fleet by next week." Krythax's recording device trembled in his 6-fingered grip as he tried to process what he was seeing. The weapon in Unesio's hands looked like a Kalash rifle, but sleeker, more aggressive. The energy matrix, visible through transparent sections, glowed with an intensity that far exceeded anything he had seen in standard Kalash equipment. "You reverse-engineered their technology in 3 weeks?" His voice cracked slightly as he asked the question. "Oh, that was the easy part," said Chief Engineer Jinwoo Park, not bothering to look up from his workstation where holographic schematics rotated in complex patterns. His hands moved over controls with the fluid precision of someone who had been working with this technology for years, not weeks. "The hard part was figuring out how to make it compatible with our manufacturing systems. Kalash engineering is surprisingly inefficient once you understand the underlying principles." Krythax watched Jinwoo manipulate the hologram, watching as weapon components were redesigned in real time. The engineer would identify a potential improvement, test it virtually, then immediately transmit the updated specifications to the ST production line. The entire process took minutes, not the months or years that such development typically required. "I don't understand," Krythax said, his bioluminescent patches flickering with confusion. "The Kalash have been perfecting these designs for thousands of years. How can you improve them so quickly?" Jinwoo finally looked up, his expression patient but slightly condescending. "That's exactly the problem. They've been using the same designs for thousands of years. When you stop innovating, you stop improving. We don't have that luxury, so we don't have those limitations." The facility around them told a story that violated everything Krythax understood about technological development. Production lines that had taken the Kalash centuries to establish were being reconfigured by humans in days. Weapons that represented the pinnacle of Kalash military engineering were being improved by creatures who had only learned about energy weapons a few months ago. But it wasn't just improvement, it was innovation at a pace that seemed almost supernatural. As Krythax watched, a team of human technicians was testing a rifle that fired not just plasma, but seemed to adapt its energy frequency based on the target's defensive systems. Another group was working on what appeared to be portable shield generators that were smaller and more powerful than anything in the Kalash arsenal. The Kalash had been using these same weapon designs for 2,000 years. Unesio continued, leading him toward a viewport that looked out over the facility's exterior. "They never considered that someone might find ways to make them better. Why would they? They've conquered half the galaxy with these tools." Through the reinforced transperistal, Krythax could see something that made his nervous system flood with adrenaline. Human shipyards stretched to the horizon, their construction berths filled with vessels that looked wrong somehow. They incorporated the best elements of Kalish engineering, the efficient power systems, the advanced hull materials, the sophisticated weapon mounts, but combined them with something aggressive and purposeful that made his primitive brain scream warnings. The ships were larger than standard Kalish vessels, more heavily armed, and covered with sensor arrays that suggested capabilities far beyond anything he had seen before. More disturbing was the sheer number of them. Construction berths that should have taken months to complete a single vessel were launching finished ships every few days. "How many ships are you building?" Krythax asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jinwoo finally looked up from his workstation. For the first time since Krythax had met him, the engineer smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Enough. That single word carried implications. That made Krythax's recording equipment nearly slip from his trembling appendages. Enough for what? Enough to defend against the Kalish? Or enough for something much more ambitious? That night, alone in his quarters aboard the human facility, Krythax accessed the communication networks to file his daily report. What he discovered instead sent chills through his entire nervous system. Human communications traffic was enormous, coordinating activities across dozens of star systems. As he traced the signal patterns, a horrifying picture emerged. This facility wasn't unique. Similar installations were operating on 47 different worlds, all producing weapons, ships, and technologies at rates that should have been impossible for humanity's limited industrial base. But somehow, they had not only matched Kalish production capacity, they had exceeded it. The communications revealed construction schedules, resource allocation, and production quotas that painted a picture of military expansion on a scale that defied comprehension. The humans weren't just defending their territory anymore. They were building the infrastructure for something much larger. One intercepted message particularly caught his attention. It was from Admiral Sujin Kwan to the commanders of what appeared to be multiple fleet groups, Phase 1 complete ahead of schedule. All production facilities operating at 110% capacity. Phase 2 authorization requested for expansion into Sectors 7 through 15. Sectors 7 through 15 weren't human territory. They weren't even Kalish territory. They were neutral space, home to dozens of independent species who had managed to avoid the current conflict. But according to these communications, the humans were already making plans for them. As Krythax compiled his findings, he realized he was no longer documenting a desperate species fighting for survival. He was witnessing the birth of something the galaxy had never seen before, a civilization that treated warfare not as destruction, but as opportunity. Every battle was a learning experience. Every captured technology was a chance for improvement. Every victory was a stepping stone to something larger. The humans weren't just winning their war against the Kalish. They were using that war to transform themselves into something that could challenge the entire galactic order. And based on what he had seen in the past week, they were succeeding far faster than anyone could have imagined. Outside his window, human ships continued to launch from the yards, their hulls gleaming with technologies that had been impossible just months before. Each one represented not just military strength, but the terrifying efficiency of a species that had learned to turn every disadvantage into an opportunity for growth. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when a species that had spent its entire history fighting for survival suddenly found itself with the tools to do more than just survive. The command center aboard the human flagship Endurance hummed with quiet efficiency that made Krythax's skin crawl. No alarms, no shouting, no desperate energy that typically filled military headquarters before major operations. Just calm, methodical preparation that spoke of absolute confidence in the outcome. Admiral Sujin Kwan stood before a holographic display that dominated the center of the room, showing the Kalish home system in perfect three-dimensional detail. Every moon, every space station, every patrol route was mapped out with precision that suggested months of careful observation. Her staff officers moved around the projection like surgeons preparing for a delicate operation, each one focused on their specific role in what Human Command had designated Operation Final Answer. Krythax activated his recording equipment. Though his appendages shook slightly as he did so, over the past weeks, he had witnessed impossible things. But something about this moment felt different. final. The humans weren't preparing for another battle. They were preparing to end the war entirely. Kalish Command believes we're still fighting a defensive war, Sujin began, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone that Krythax had learned to associate with human military briefings. Their latest intelligence reports suggest we have perhaps 50 ships capable of deep space operations scattered across our territory in desperate defensive positions. Colonel Haiyan Wusong stepped forward, his finger tracing patterns in the holographic display. As he moved, the projection shifted to show fleet positions that made Krythax's heart skip several beats. Meat red markers appeared throughout space, each one representing human vessels in positions that should have been impossible. Actual human fleet strength, Hyunwoo announced with the casual tone of someone reading a grocery list. 2,437 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts of our own design, 43 heavy cruisers incorporating hybrid human Kalish technology, and over 800 support craft equipped with weapon systems the enemy has never encountered. Krythax felt his respiratory system seize completely. But the numbers weren't just impossible, they were insane. 3 months ago, according to his own research, humans had possessed maybe 24 functional warships, most of them civilian vessels hastily converted for military use. The mathematics of ship construction alone should have made such rapid expansion impossible. The word escaped his vocal cords as barely a whisper. Sujin turned to face him directly, and for a moment Krythax saw something in her eyes that made him understand why the Kalish should be afraid. It wasn't madness or bloodlust, it was the calm certainty of a predator that had cornered its prey. "You want to know the real secret?" she asked, stepping closer to the holographic display. "We've been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. Not just against other species, against ourselves, against our environment, against extinction itself. Every natural disaster, every resource shortage, every existential threat has taught us the same lesson: adapt or die." Your hologram shifted to show human fleet movements, and Krythax realized he was looking at something that violated every principle of space warfare he had ever learned. Human ships appeared throughout Kalish space, not invading, but already positioned, having somehow traveled through hyperspace routes that weren't supposed to exist. "The Kalish have been the dominant military power for millennia," Sujin continued. "They've forgotten what it's like to face a species that treats warfare as evolution. Every battle makes us stronger. Every defeat teaches us something new. Every victory shows us new possibilities." Lieutenant Commander Daeyoon Kim materialized beside the display, her uniform bearing the insignia of what appeared to be deep space reconnaissance. "My teams have been mapping Kalish territory for 2 months," she explained, highlighting sections of the hologram that showed supply lines, communication networks, and defensive positions. "We know the location of every shipyard, every supply depot, every critical infrastructure node, and every weakness in their defensive grid." Krythax stared at the intelligence displayed before him. The level of detail was staggering, not just military installations, but civilian infrastructure, government facilities, even the personal residences of Kalish leadership. This wasn't reconnaissance. It was preparation for total conquest. "Yeah, your ships," Krythax managed to say. "They're already in position. How did you get past Kalish early warning systems?" Daeyoon smiled, and once again Krythax was reminded that humans had evolved as predators. You didn't get past their systems, improved them. Every piece of Kalish technology we captured, we studied, reverse-engineered, and enhanced, including their sensor networks. They're not just failing to detect our ships, their own systems are helping us hide. The attack began at exactly 0800 Galactic Standard Time, and it began everywhere at once. Krythax watched through the holographic display as human forces struck throughout Kalish space with surgical precision. But this wasn't the destructive assault he expected. Instead of destroying Kalish facilities, human forces were capturing them intact, their advanced troops moving through enemy installations like they had been planning these operations for years. "Shipyard Alpha 7 secured," came a report from one of the communication officers. "Production facilities intact. Its estimated time to convert to human manufacturing standards, 6 hours. Supply Depot Gamma 12 under human control," reported. Another, weapons stockpiles being redistributed to friendly forces. Within the first hour, Krythax realized he wasn't watching a battle. He was watching the systematic dismantling of an entire civilization's military capacity. The Kalash weren't just being defeated, they were being absorbed. Their own weapons, their own ships, their own infrastructure was being turned against them with an efficiency that spoke of long-term planning and preparation. Command Center beaten and captured, came another report. We now have access to Kalash communication networks, uploading virus packages to disrupt coordination between remaining defensive forces. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the speed of the human advance, but the reactions of the Kalash forces. Through intercepted communications, Krythax could hear the growing panic in Kalash military channels. They were fighting enemies using their own technology, but using it better than they ever had. Modified Kalash fighters with improved engines and weapon systems. Enhanced Kalash battlecruisers with human tactical systems. Even Kalash ground forces were reporting encounters with warriors using familiar armor and weapons, but with capabilities that exceeded original specifications. This isn't a battle, Krythax realized, his voice barely audible over the steady stream of victory reports. This is annexation. Stujin nodded grimly, her attention focused on the holographic display that showed Kalash resistance collapsing across multiple star systems simultaneously. The Kalash started a war. Were finishing their empire. But why? Krythax asked. You could have negotiated a peace treaty, established boundaries. The galactic community would have supported a reasonable settlement. For the first time since he had met her, Sujin's expression showed something approaching emotion. It's not anger or hatred, but something far more disturbing, disappointment. They came to our worlds, she said quietly. They attacked our colonies, killed our people, and expected us to submit or die. They made one critical error in their calculations. What error? Sujin turned back to the display, where the last Kalash strongholds were falling to human forces. With clockwork precision, we assumed we were just another species trying to survive. They never considered that we might be something else entirely. A species that gets stronger every time someone tries to destroy us. As Krythax watched the final phase of Operation Final Answer unfold, he realized he wasn't documenting the end of a war. He was witnessing the birth of a new galactic power, one that had learned to turn every conflict into an opportunity for growth. Every enemy into a source of new capabilities, and every challenge into a chance to evolve beyond what anyone thought possible. The Kalash Empire, which had dominated this sector of the galaxy for over 4,000 years, was ending not with destruction, but with transformation into the foundation of something unprecedented. A human-controlled space that combined the industrial capacity of a galactic empire with the innovative drive of a species that refused to accept limitations. And this was just the beginning. The silence in Krythax's quarters aboard the transport shipped Truth Seeker felt heavier than the vacuum of space itself. His recording devices lay scattered across the small desk, each one containing hours of footage that would fundamentally alter how every species in the galaxy viewed. His six-fingered hands trembled as he organized the data chips, knowing that within days, this report would reach every major power in known space. The final battle had lasted exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes. Krythax had timed it himself. Watching from the observation deck of a human command vessel as the Kalash Empire, which had dominated this sector of the galaxy for over 3,000 years, simply ceased to exist. It's not destroyed in the traditional sense, not conquered through overwhelming force, but absorbed so completely that it was as if the Kalash had never been an independent civilization at all. Human. Administrators were already walking through the corridors of what had been the Kalash High Command, implementing new governance systems with the casual efficiency of office workers starting a new job. Human engineers moved through Kalash infrastructure like they had built it themselves, upgrading systems that had remained unchanged for millennia. Most disturbing of all, former Kalash military personnel were being integrated into human forces, their loyalty apparently secured through methods that Krythax couldn't begin to understand. But the most terrifying revelation had come during his final interview with Fleet Admiral Junho Shin, conducted in what had once been the Kalash Emperor's throne room. The massive chamber had been converted into a communication center within hours of its capture, filled with human technicians who operated captured Kalish equipment better than its original designers. "You've documented our emergence into galactic society," Junho had said, his calm voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "But I want you to understand something important. This was just our first war." The Admiral had gestured toward the holographic displays showing human ships spreading throughout former Kalish territory, each vessel incorporating technologies that hadn't existed months before. "We've learned how your technology works, how your military doctrines function, how your political systems operate. Most importantly, we've learned how other species think." Those words haunted Krythax as he prepared his final report. The humans hadn't just won a military conflict, they had conducted a comprehensive study of galactic civilization. Using the Kalish as unwilling test subjects, every battle had been a learning experience. Every captured installation a classroom, every defeated enemy a source of new knowledge. Krythax activated his primary recording device and began what he knew would be the most important transmission of his career. "Galactic Broadcasting Consortium, this is Senior Correspondent Krythax filing from former Kalish space. What I have witnessed over the past 4 months challenges our fundamental assumptions about technological development, capability, and species evolution." He paused, staring out the viewport at human vessels moving through space with the confidence of apex predators. Their hulls gleamed with armor that combined the best elements of dozens of different technologies. 8 weapon systems that shouldn't have been possible, and sensor arrays that seem to see everything. The species designation human should be immediately reclassified from developing civilization to existential priority. They do not simply adapt to galactic civilization, they improve it, weaponize it, and master it at speeds that suggest preparation for conflicts we cannot yet imagine. The words felt inadequate as he spoke them. How could he convey what he had witnessed? How could he explain the sight of humans reverse engineering Kalish technology in real time during battle, improving it as they learned to use it? How could he describe the methodical way they had turned every Kalish advantage into a weakness, every defensive position into a trap? "I have watched them reverse engineer technologies in weeks that took other species centuries to develop. I have seen them turn every disadvantage into an advantage, every loss into a lesson, every enemy weapon into their own tool. They do not simply fight, they evolve during combat, becoming more dangerous with each engagement." Through his viewport, Krythax could see a human construction fleet working on what had been the Kalish Empire's primary shipyard. In the time it had taken him to organize his thoughts, they had already begun modifying the facility to produce vessels of their own design. The efficiency was terrifying, not because it was fast, but because it was so thorough. Nothing was wasted, nothing was overlooked, and every improvement built upon the last. The Kalish Empire fell, not because humans were stronger, but because they thought like no other species we have encountered. They do not fight wars, they solve them. Every conflict is treated as a puzzle to be understood, disassembled and disassembled, and reconstructed to their advantage. Krythax remembered watching human soldiers studying fallen Kalish warriors, not just taking their weapons, but analyzing their armor, their tactics, even their biology. Within days, human forces were using modified Kalish equipment that performed better than the originals. Within weeks, they were producing weapons that made Kalish technology look primitive. I have observed human forces integrate captured enemy personnel with success rates that approach 100%. Former Kalish officers now serve in human fleets, not as prisoners or reluctant conscripts, but as willing participants in humanity's expansion. The methods used to achieve this loyalty remain unclear, but the results are undeniable. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the military conquest. It was the speed of integration. Humans didn't just defeat their enemies. They absorbed them completely, incorporating their knowledge, their technology, and even their personnel into a growing civilization that seemed to have unlimited capacity for growth. Krythax closed his eyes, knowing that his next words would change everything. Based on intercepted communications and observed fleet movements, human forces are already making contact with species beyond former Kalish territory. They are not expanding as conquerors, but as researchers. Each new contact is an opportunity to learn about different technologies, different forms of government, different ways of thinking. My final recommendation to the Galactic Council is this: humanity's integration into galactic society is inevitable. The only question is whether other species will be partners in that process or study subjects. He paused the recording, his hands shaking as he contemplated the implications of his own words. Through the viewport, he could see human exploration vessels launching toward the galactic core, their courses set for systems that housed ancient civilizations, powerful empires, and technologies that had been stable for millennia. I have spent my career documenting the rise and fall of civilizations, he continued. I have watched species destroy themselves through war, stagnate through complacency, or simply fade into irrelevance. What I have witnessed with humanity is different. They do not rise or fall, they evolve. Every challenge makes them stronger. Every enemy teaches them something new. Every victory opens new possibilities. Krythax reactivated the recording for his final statement. To any species receiving this transmission, the humans are coming. Not as invaders, but as something far more dangerous as the next step in galactic evolution. They will offer partnership, cooperation, and mutual benefit. I recommend accepting these offers, because the alternative is to become a case study in their ongoing research into the nature of galactic civilization. He transmitted the report through the Galactic Broadcasting Network, knowing that within hours it would reach every major power in known space. Some would dismiss it as the ravings of a correspondent who had spent too long in a war zone. Others would begin preparing for humanity's arrival. Both reactions would be too late. Through his viewport, Krythax watched the last of the human fleet disappear into hyperspace, leaving behind a sector of space that had been completely transformed in less than a year. Where the Kalish Empire had once ruled through force and tradition, something new was emerging, a civilization that treated the entire galaxy as a classroom and every other species as either a teacher or a student. The age of stable galactic civilization was ending. What would replace it was beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined. As his transport ship prepared to depart for the galactic core, Krythax wondered if he had just filed the most important news report in galactic history, or the last one that would ever matter. The humans were loose in the galaxy. They were just getting started. The end.